Good morning. A little bit of a foggy morning across parts of Michigan, but for some, especially those in the southeastern part of the state, a little bit of a smile. They picked up some rainfall here overnight, and they've been few and far between, but we'll take it when we get it. And I'll talk a little bit more about where we're headed here. I want to start though looking at our review. It was last week was a cooler than normal week, and those are temperature departures from normal on the left-hand side. And you can see for most of the state, it actually 3 to as much as 6 or 7 degrees Fahrenheit below normal. We had a Canadian origin air mass over the Great Lakes region, and it was cool and actually dry as well. And as a result of that, we had below normal temperatures, but also some frost and freezing temperatures reported in some of the states. I'll show you in a graphic on that here in just a moment. Just or even more importantly for many, if we look at precipitation, we did have the most significant weather system that the area or the state has seen in several weeks move through last Thursday and Friday. And we talked about this last week. And it was a little disappointing in terms of the area that was covered, but we did get some very significant rainfall amounts, some cases more than an inch. But generally, a half to 1 inch of rain fell across large portions of central and southern lower. And you can see that on the right-hand side here. Some portions of west central Michigan, when you include some of the showers and thunderstorms that fell earlier last week, did better than that. And you can see some cases over 2 inches there. But the best rainfall was in that part of the state. There was also an area down here in the southeast that also totaled up more than 2. In contrast to that, note there was one area here from the southwestern lower northeastward up towards the bay and to the thumb where totals were more in the 1/2 to 1 inch. So it was significantly less, and again, not enough to really change the long-term situation. But I think, again, it was the most widespread rainfall we had seen, at least spatially, in terms of aerial coverage for several weeks. So that's definitely a positive thing, but obviously more is needed. I mentioned last week we had several consecutive mornings with overnight temperatures that fell in many cases into the 30s. There were actually some upper 20s in interior areas of the UP and the far northern lower, but that was more the exception than the rule. A lot of areas were in the 30s. And there were most of these nights, so you can see here from the 27th through the morning of the 31st, we generally had clear, calm conditions overnight, perfect radiation, frost type or cooling type of conditions. And so we saw, especially in low-lying areas where cold air ponds or drains and ponds and accumulates, we saw frost show up there. And here in Hazlet, I had frost on 2 of those mornings, but other places had even more than that. We have had some reports of a little bit of tip burn or vegetative dieback at the very top, but generally it was not a hard freeze. It was more of again, a frost condition. Far northern part of the state, it was a little bit colder. I would also say with regard to this, climatologically now, except for interior areas of the northern part of the state, we're now at or almost beyond where we would ever typically see frost or certainly freezing temperatures once we move into the first week of June. So never say never, but crossing fingers here, statistically here, we probably have seen the end of the season. And it's been a long season in terms of frost freeze risk. We've had many, many mornings like that. And I would also say some of this goes back to the dry landscapes. When we have dry soils, dry landscapes, we take a couple degrees or a few degrees off of the minimum temperatures because the heat just does not flow as readily in and out of the soil profile. The same thing goes true for maximum temperatures. During the daytime, we add, it gets a little bit warmer when we don't have water in the landscape to evaporate, and also for the same reason at nighttime, the thermal conductivity is also reduced. So the combination of those things makes a drier landscape colder during the morning and warmer during the afternoon. And we're going to see, unfortunately, here coming up over the next several days, most of a week, we're going to see some of that actually in actually working outside and some of it happening. Our degree day totals with the cooler than normal week are, well, we did have some accumulation here. These are corn-based 50-degree days here beginning in the 1st of May. But relative to normal, we actually, the northern part of the state actually fell a few days behind. Most of the state, though, is right around normal for this time of the year, at least in terms of thermal accumulation. But we are, again, in the northern part of the state now lagging a few days or calendar days behind. Soil moisture, moving over to the moisture topic here on the left-hand side. This is plant available moisture in essentially the top 3 feet. And some of the data that, the numbers that Lyndon and Young Suk were sharing here, the values here are lowest. Again, this is the percent of what could be there. So 100% is top, but we have in many areas in southern lower Michigan, we're on the 20 to perhaps 40% maximum. That's the values that we have right now. So one way of looking at that, I think it was Lyndon had an example with a loamy sand or sandy loam soil that had about 4.4 inches of water, of plant available water in the top 3 feet. What that means is that right now at 20%, we have around maybe 9/10 of that water that is available to plants. So it's not on empty, but it's pretty far down in the tank here in terms of reserve, and this is significantly lower at this time of the year than we typically see. The value on, or the values here on the right, the image here on the right, this is the relative change in 1 week. And again, given the precipitation we had, I was hoping for a little bit of a bump here in moisture. And you can see to our west, in areas that had more precipitation, greens here mean that you've added additional water to, or additional plant available water to that top 3 feet. But in Michigan, we really only see that down along the southern border where the amounts were higher. So again, it was very, very important. It was a great temporary shot, and for a lot of reasons to get the water, but it really didn't solve the long-term problem. Is still there. And that this image illustrates that. These are daily accumulations of precipitation in green here for this year. And then the brown is the normal. This is for Kalamazoo. It's fairly typical, though, of much of the southern half of lower Michigan. And you can see here that for this period, this goes back to the beginning of the calendar year, we would typically have somewhere under just under 12 inches of precipitation would be normal for that time frame. We've only observed at this particular site about 5.6 inches, and you can see the departure there, and Lyndon showed a map of this as well. These are at 6 inches. That's a lot of water, and it's a lot of water to have to make up, and it's one that we rather not have going into the beginning of the growing season, but the long-term deficits are certainly still there. Our latest U.S. Drought Monitor, and this again, for reasons we talked about last week, this is still about a week out of phase. It increased the area just a little bit, but about 79% of Michigan currently, until the next issuance here coming up in another hour or so from the Drought Mitigation Center, is about 79% is in some form of abnormal dryness, and that includes 6% down here in the southwestern corner of the state. That's actually now in the D2 severe drought. And again, we don't see that typically very often in Michigan, but it has shown up here again. If there aren't that many changes in today's issuance, given the forecast and given that we're moving towards a hot and dry outlook, one would certainly anticipate maybe some changes in this in the next 1 to 2 weeks. Well, let's look ahead here at where we're headed. We did have a weather system brush the southeastern corner of the state last night, and you can see that here, this weak area of low pressure. And it actually, looking at the totals from EnviroWeather and from the radar estimates, some spots in southeastern lower, and I think Lyndon mentioned this, over towards Branch County, picked up almost a half. Some cases, that was the highest I saw, was just a little over half an inch. And it was, the good news about that was it was over several hours, and it was probably almost all of it soaked in and was allowed to infiltrate rather than running off. But the amounts as you move north and west from that southeastern corner of the state dropped off very rapidly. I only had 3/100 of an inch here in Hazlet, to give you an example, and almost enough just to settle a dust. And most of the northern part of the state saw little or no precipitation with this. So that basically was last night's system. Where we're headed here is we have a chance with this trough here, a little bit of a weak upper air disturbance. There could be some isolated showers or a thunderstorm develop here, but over the next couple days. But if it does, consider yourself very, very lucky, because most people will not see that. And even when we do get precipitation, it will be very limited, less than a tenth of an inch or two at best. By tomorrow morning, one other weak weather system here approaching the state again, isolated showers or a thunder shower possible, but the vast majority of the state will remain dry. The other big news here with the forecast is there will be a noticeable but a significant warming starting today. We will see low 80s in many parts of at least the lower peninsula, and tomorrow we'll see mid, maybe a couple of upper 80s for high temperatures. And by Saturday, as we look here at the map on Saturday, you can see a big area, Bermuda, or a high pressure system down here in the southeast with very pronounced southwesterly flow. If you've been following the weather here in recent weeks, you notice that they've set a lot of records for heat and high temperatures out in the southwest. Well, a piece of that air mass is headed our way. That's essentially what we're looking at, and we're going to see the formation of a big upper air ridge here right across the region, and all those things collectively point to an extended period of heat and dryness. Unfortunately, again, given the water situation, especially starting in earnest, really in some areas tomorrow, all of the state by Saturday, and then continuing for the rest of the weekend into early next week. And for many areas, we will see high temperatures at or slightly above 90 degrees. Low temperatures increasing from the 50s overnight tonight up into the 60s. And by the weekend, we'll be looking at really late summer type readings with low temperatures only in the mid and upper 60s. So we'll be racking up an awful lot of growing degree days here over the upcoming week, as well as hot conditions. How much water in the gauge? Well, after the next 48 hours, the next chance for anything significant in terms of precipitation, and that's what you're seeing here, probably coming as early as next Monday night or Tuesday. More likely, though, I think on Wednesday, Thursday type time frame. So we've got to wait a while before the next chance for rain. You can see that the totals here are generally less than a quarter of an inch, which would translate overall for the whole state and the region another drier than normal week, which is really the last thing we need right now. But we're still stuck in the same type of weather pattern with most of the between storm tracks, one to our north, one to our south, and we've been caught in that here for a long time now. And again, you can see it here very, very well in terms of the precipitation that's is forecast. But right now, it's looking pretty likely like another dry week. And I mentioned the high temperatures here. These are high temperatures for Sunday, this upcoming Sunday, in the low 90s. Just as importantly, and following up on what Lyndon and Jan Suk talked about here, this is something we usually don't see in early June, but daily, these are potential evapotranspiration rates. So again, just to follow up on Lyndon's comments, these are not what the crop is actually using. This is what the atmospheric demand or the atmospheric conditions would demand from that grass reference surface. And what you don't see, if you look at this, you can see some 0.3s on here. And I'll tell you from the climatology perspective, we don't see this very often in Michigan. Those are very, very high for us at any time of the year. Those are at the top end. A quarter of an inch of reference potential evapotranspiration is a pretty high midsummer type value, but 0.3 again is almost getting to the extreme level, something we don't see very often. And I think, as Lyndon mentioned, we are looking at weekly rates of reference potential evapotranspiration on the order of 1.6 inches, which also, again, very, very high for Michigan here between now and the middle of next week, with combined mostly sunny skies and very, very hot, warm daytime temperatures and average relative humidities during the day. All of those will combine to lead to very, very strong evaporative demand. So keep an eye, if you do have the irrigation, keep a close eye on the water needs, because they are going to be definitely elevated for the next week. Well, where are we headed here in terms of the future? Well, probably more of the same. And both the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day outlooks are very, very similar and call for warmer than normal average temperatures. That's a very, very strong likelihood. And normal, maybe a little bit below normal precipitation totals. And again, it's a follow-up on this same pattern that we've been stuck in. So really, not much of a change here is indicated in the medium range. There is a new revised long lead outlook that came out from the Climate Prediction Center for the month of June. It's essentially the same thing, above normal mean temperatures for the month of June. And it actually, and this is a little bit different, it does call for normal to perhaps above normal precipitation totals, but we just do not see that meteorologically, that change to allow more moisture up here yet. We're keeping a close eye on that. So summarizing here, summer is on the way. Definitely with a warming trend, dry and the heat here by the weekend, with high daytime temperatures in the low 90s and high PET rates. And as you just saw here, the medium range is suggesting more in the long term, certainly of the above normal temperatures.